I don't know what to do. My name's David Woodall with the Emsdale Pastoral Charge of the United Church of Canada. I don't know what to do. How often do we think that? Pilate had the same dilemma on the day Jesus stood before him. I don't know what to do. This man's innocent. I'm sure that the people who are accusing him have set him up. I just can't prove it. And he won't give me a straight answer. But if they complain to Rome one more time, I'll lose my job. The scriptures suggest that Pilate wanted to do the right thing, but he didn't have the courage. He crucified Jesus in order to keep his job. Palestine was a troubled land, and Rome needed to station troops there. In the Roman system of things, troubled lands requiring troops were directly under the control of the emperor. The emperor appointed a procurator to govern the land. The procurator was in full control of the military and judicial operations of the province. He was to visit every part of the province at least once a year, hearing complaints and making judgments. He gathered taxes, but he had no authority to increase them. He was paid a salary from the treasury and was strictly forbidden to accept presents or bribes. If he exceeded his duties or poorly governed the people of his province, they had the power to report him to the emperor. Now, Pilate was the procurator appointed by the Emperor Augustus in AD 26. And everything that we know about Pilate came from the time that he was the procurator of Palestine. For the Romans, Palestine was a troubled province, and it was a strategic land in the empire. So it makes sense to presume that Pilate had the reputation of being a good administrator, or he would never have been appointed to that position. In spite of the appointment by the emperor, though, it seems that the general consensus of the population was that as a governor, he was a failure. For instance, on the first visit to Jerusalem, he arrived with a detachment of soldiers. The soldiers brought their standards, and on top of the standards, there was a little bust in metal of the reigning emperor. Well, the emperor throughout the Roman Empire was regarded as a god, but the Jewish people saw that bust as a graven image, and they wouldn't bow down. All the previous governors, in deference to the religion of the Jews, had removed the image before entering the city. Pilate refused to do so. The people of Jerusalem requested him to remove them. Pilate wouldn't pander to their superstitions. He went back to Caesarea, which was his capital city, but the protesters followed him. They dogged his footsteps for 5 days. Finally, he told them to meet in the amphitheater, but he laid a trap. When they gathered, he surrounded the protesters with armed soldiers and informed them that if they did not stop their requests, he would have them killed right then, right there. You can picture the tension. The new governor needing to establish his authority. The Jewish leaders surrounded by soldiers. A drop of sweat trickled down one of their faces. Finally, one, then another, and another of the Jewish leaders bared their necks and asked the soldiers to kill them. Pilate's bluff was called. He wasn't a barbarian. He tried to be a reasonable man. Even when he was talking with Jesus, he tried to be reasonable. On that day in the amphitheater, he did not kill those Jewish leaders. Instead, he agreed to remove the offending image. And so Pilate's reign began by losing his authority to the Jewish people. After having governed for a while, Pilate realized that the Jerusalem water supply was inadequate. So he decided to build a new aqueduct. I think there was a lot of tension, obviously, between Pilate and the religious leaders, a bit of a power struggle that went on throughout his reign. In order to finance this new aqueduct, which would be good for the people and for the temple, he actually raided the temple, who had millions of dollars in reserves and treasures. It was a good project for the people of Jerusalem, a great undertaking. The water supply would even be a benefit to the temple, which used a lot of water in cleaning and sacrifices. But the people resented it. They rioted and surged through the streets. Finally, Pilate responded by mingling his soldiers with them in plain clothes. They carried concealed weapons, and at a given signal they attacked the mob, and many of the crowd were clubbed or stabbed to death. Another time, Pilate had shields made engraved with the emperor's name and devoted to the memory of the emperor. But again, this was a graven image. So when the shields were displayed in Jerusalem, the people were enraged. The leaders, even his closest supporters, urged Pilate to remove them, but he refused. This matter was reported to the emperor, who ordered Pilate to remove them. Pilate later in his life was recalled by the emperor after savagely quelling a rebellion in Samaria. The Jewish authorities had already reported Pilate before this rebellion because of how he dealt with the riots over the aqueduct. And we know that he was reported over the incidents of the shields. William Barclay writes about this background of why Pilate acted as he did with Jesus. Barclay wrote, "It is clear why Pilate acted as he did. The Jewish leaders blackmailed him into crucifying Jesus. They said, if you let this man go, you are not Caesar's friend. That was, in effect, your record is not too good. You were reported once before, or twice before. If you don't give us our way, we will report you again, and the emperor will dismiss you." On that day in Jerusalem, Pilate's past rose up to haunt him. He was blackmailed into assenting to the death of Jesus because his previous mistakes had made it impossible for him to both defy the Jews and to keep his job. And somehow we cannot help but be sorry for Pilate. He wanted to do the right thing, but he didn't have the courage to defy the people of Jerusalem. He crucified Jesus in order to keep his job. I don't know what to do. This man standing before me, I don't understand. Why don't you tell me? Why don't you give me a straight answer, Jesus? Are you a king? Yes. No? Are you a Messiah? Yes. No? You speak about truth, but what is truth? And the tragically comic figure of Pilate runs back and forth between the crowd outside and Jesus inside. He shouts his authority, but acts in fear and confusion. He sacrifices what is right to petty politics and prejudice. He says in his charge, but it's obvious that Jesus is in charge. The people who are accusing him have set him up. I just can't prove it. And he won't give me a straight answer, but if they complain to Rome one more time, I will lose my job. What should I do? To do the right thing sometimes has a steep cost. I would like to say that to follow God, to be connected with the creator of the world, the giver of all life is easy. Just go ahead and do it. Sometimes it's not that simple. To be part of the creative, beautiful, justice-filled world God intended is something that you work at. To be fully authentic person, to be the one that lies inside of you sometimes takes work. It takes effort. It takes vision and some hope. You know, and I know that anything worthwhile, anything worth giving your life for, anything worth living for has a cost. In fact, one of the earliest and greatest truths of our faith was expressed in the idea that in order to live, we need to die. Or as Nicodemus asked, how can an old man be born again? The cry of Pilate is echoed down through the centuries and becomes our cry today. I don't know what to do. What should I do? Life invites us to decision making. It calls us to living with integrity. Our faith is based on the idea that you will decide to seek out the spiritual part of your life, however you want to express it. I decided to meditate in nature, or perhaps I decided to go to church, or perhaps I decided to help my neighbor, or I decided to help invite Christ into my life, however you express it. We express the decision making in so many ways, but they all say the same thing. I am making a choice. Now, I have no idea if Pilate was ever saddened or upset about the decision that he made that day with Jesus in his presence. But I do know that he sentenced Jesus to death in order to save his job. And as horrible as that sounds, I fear that too often you and I do exactly the same thing. We allow convenience to guide us. We ignore because it's more convenient to do so. We pretend that we can go on thinking that I am the most important person in the universe. And we close our eyes because to open them means to see. So we close our eyes. And then we don't have to see that stomach bloated, starving child or the tear stained eyes of a parent all alone. We can ignore brothers and sisters. We can sleep in on a Sunday morning. We can have that new gadget and it's okay. And so long as we keep our eyes closed, we don't need to see. I'm sure the floods in Dubai and the heat wave in India and the forest fires in northern Ontario are not my problem. I can keep my eyes closed. Those things just happen. And I wonder, are we actually afraid of seeing? Is that why we don't open our eyes? Is that why our ears are not tuned to our environment? I have to tell you that one of my fears of earbuds and focusing on my cell phone as I walk down the street is that I don't hear the world around me. I am not aware of my environment. I don't see my neighbors. And when we do tune in, how many of us have turned our back because some situation was not what we thought it should be, because some person has said some words that offended us? I know a woman who had angry words with her brothers and sisters and for 40 years wouldn't talk with them. And when she died, no one came to her funeral. And so we have the tableau of Pilate and Jesus facing each other in silence, waiting. They speak different languages. Their priorities are different. Two men speaking two different languages with two different views of the world. Pilate can't make up his mind. He rushes back and forth in turmoil. Like all of us, when we can't make up our minds, we go around in circles. We seek direction from our friends, we consult specialists, we listen to our hearts, we listen to our heads. We can't make up our minds. And sometimes for people, this tears them apart on the inside. People become sick, physically sick, when they can't make up their minds. To be undecided, to be unsure can literally take you and rip you apart. You make the right decisions with your mind, and you're afraid that you should have followed your heart. You make the right decisions with your heart, and you're afraid you should have followed your mind. Indecision, doubt, undecided. What should I do? You stand in a forest, and from your clearing, there are 6 or 8 paths you could follow. You take 2 steps down one and decide it's the wrong one, so you return to the clearing. You choose another path and do the same. You choose another path and do the same, and in the end, you just stay in the clearing. And when is it that you'll decide? When is it that you will leave the clearing? There is a decision. Is it yes or is it no?